This week, each qualifying candidate pledged to boycott the debate in solidarity with the Unite Here Local 11 Food Workers Union. They've been working at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles without a contract and say they'll too picket the debate if their labor dispute is not resolved before debate night. Joining me now to discuss this, Democratic strategist Emily Tisch Sussman and Basil Smikle. Basil, I want to start with you. So if this labor dispute is not settled by Thursday, what do you think is going to happen?
Maybe the Democrats will find an alternate site to hold this debate, and they rightfully so. You want to support the organized labor, which I think there hasn't been enough discussion in this cycle about the role of organized labor, not only politically, but also in moving folks into the middle class. This would be a great way to show solidarity with them.
Emily, the whole reason this debate exists at Loyola Marymount University is because of that labor dispute. Is this a window into a key issue that Democrats are going to be raising coming up in 2020?
I think we can definitely expect to see it across the entire race in 2020, talking about labor, talking about how to shift the balance of power between employers and employees. That is something that actually there's been pretty robust platforms on that have come from many of the candidates. Buttigieg, interestingly, has one of the strongest platforms on organized labor. What will actually be interesting in this debate, I think because of the strike, we can guarantee that it will come up as a very big issue, even more so than others. What's actually been interesting, and we talk about the future of work, is that Yang has now qualified for the debate, and it's kind of centered his platform on universal basic income and the future of work. He actually has the least platform of any of the candidates who have qualified, and those who haven't actually, on organized labor in particular.
Basil, only one person of color has qualified for this debate coming up here, the least diverse debate yet. Does that send any warning signals to you?
Of course it does.
Yeah.
There's a racist in the White House, and I'm happy that Andrew Yang has made it to the debate stage, but Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Julian Castro, who's been thundering away at immigration and the crisis at the border, and he's not on that stage, it is a bit disheartening. I know that there have been conversations about the campaigns themselves, but I think there's a bigger issue here. The narrative about this race from the very beginning has been about working class white males. And what does that do? That has an impact on candidate strategy, policy, but also candidate choice. You have voters thinking, well, is that black man or that African American woman going to be able to bring in white working class voters? And my concern has always been that that narrative becomes disqualifying for some candidates. And I've been very, very concerned about it. And frankly, I think that has done them a disadvantage more than anything else.
What do you think about that, Emily? The DNC instituted this for a reason. Is it backfiring on them?
I do think it's backfiring. Look, voters of color are the backbone of the Democratic Party, and you cannot win a general election without voters of color, particularly without African American voters, particularly without African American women. So to your point that there's been this overemphasis on white male working class voters, possibly to disqualification, certainly in messaging of voters of color, that message that gets out there. Look, you have to whittle it down somehow. You have to have some kind of criteria. But the fact that this has ended up being the result is not great for voter confidence in the party and for the candidate. Look, it's not just the Obama-Trump voters that gave the election to Trump. It was also the fact that many voters, particularly voters of color, were disqualified either for structural reasons or because they were not inspired. They didn't feel that they were being spoken to. So that has to be taken equally as seriously, if not more seriously.
And you've got candidates. Who's the black candidate going to South Carolina in this primary cycle? There are 4.9 million voters that voted for Obama in 2012, but did not come out in 2016. Almost a third of them were African American. Who's going to really speak to their issues? Listen, I understand Biden and certainly Elizabeth Warren have talked about issues of impacting communities of color, and particularly African Americans, but to not have one on the debate stage at this moment in time just seems incredibly problematic and short-sighted to some extent.
But if you're in the DNC, and like Emily was saying, we got to whittle it down at some point. They have to do something. So how do you do that and still ensure diversity?
Well, that was the issue. I do understand you have to whittle it down, but that was my concern about this narrative about white working class men. It's like infinite regress. I actually don't know where that really came from, but the fact is that we've been living with that narrative for a long time now. Just let voters choose the candidates they want based on the qualities that they're promoting. And let's not try to sort of be these grand strategists to talk about what the country needs. Let the voters make that decision.
All right, Basil, Emily, thank you so much for joining me today.